Hi, everyone. Welcome on in. Feel free to type in the chat where you're tuning in from. Also, make sure to, in the chat section, make sure to change where it says to from hosts to everyone, so everyone can see your messages. Hi, Jenna. Nice, Alessandra. Good to free to be here. Ooh, on vacation in Utah. Nice. Also, can everyone hear me over the music? You're tuning in from the airport. Nice. Great. I am also in LA, and we just had a heat wave start, so I have an AC blasting, or AC, I have a fan blasting around on top of me. Fort Worth. Nice. Tune in with your daughter. Ooh, we've got some LA people. It's from Toronto. I've been once. Cool. Is there every... Oh, hold on. Let me respond to this Discord message here real quick. And actually, let me grab the Discord link. She is a fat cunt, and the shoes that she gave me were not something that I would particularly buy for myself. They were old maiden type of shoes, and she said that those shoes were meant to be worn on a beautiful woman. So if that's the case, Phoenix, nice. Okay, so I will not complain about it being hot right now. Yes, we have a very special guest today, Shay, who I'll be introducing later. But yeah, she's going to be hanging out in the chat until then. Yes, we're all melting, but honestly, I thought it was going to be a little bit hotter today, so I'm a little relieved. Yeah, 114. Okay, we got nothing on you. I'm going to go ahead and drop the Discord link in the chat if you want to hop into our FEMME House server. We've got a pretty thriving community in there. Cool, I'm just going to start in a minute. Is there anyone actually that's tuning in who is here for the first time? It's your very first FEMME House workshop. Ooh, nice, welcome. I think I see a few familiar faces from the Ableton course. Nice. All right, I'm actually going to go ahead and turn this down now. So I usually wait a little bit longer to start, but since it is a little bit boiling in this room where I am, I don't have AC. I'm going to try to be a little bit snappy and to the point today, but yeah, hi everybody, welcome on in. So excited to hang out with y'all today to talk about vocal production. If you don't know who I am, my name is Lauren, my artist name is Minnie Bear, and I am the Chief Education Officer over at FEMME House, which basically means that I essentially like curate all the curriculum and all of the workshop and course topics essentially on the music production side. So we also have had some DJ workshops as well. Thank you, Amanda. Also, just to make sure everyone knows, make sure in the chat you change the word next to where it says to everyone instead of host and panelists so that everyone can see your messages. But yeah, so essentially like with FEMME House, I've been teaching the music production workshops and courses and building out all of that content and curriculum since I would say 2019, which is when FEMME House launched. For those of you who also are new to FEMME House, we're essentially a nonprofit whose aim is to make, the industry of, music production, DJing, behind the scenes, like technical areas of music, and just like the music industry in general, just more gender diverse. So since we launched, we've had free monthly workshops, we've had online courses, we've had stages at music festivals. Yeah, the list goes on. And if you're curious to kind of learn more about everything that we've done, we have like scholarships programs as well. You can check that out on our website at thisisfemmehouse.com. But yeah, I'm going to get to the point. So today I'm super, super excited because again, we're going to be focusing on vocal production. And, that can encompass quite a lot, right? Especially if you are, producing your own vocals. That usually means that you are the engineer as well as the producer, right? So I'm going to be covering like quite a few topics and trying to condense it down to between 45 minutes to an hour. And then also, I just wanted to note just some housekeeping stuff that if you have any questions that come up throughout, there is a Q&A box at the bottom that you can type your questions into. And depending upon if the questions are related to what I happen to be talking about, I may wait until the end of my portion of teaching to address those questions. And then, we have a fantastic special artist guest today named Shay, who I'll be introducing a little bit later. And she's going to go ahead and share some of her tips and tricks in terms of like how she produces her own vocals. But yeah, one of the first things I wanted to do was to kind of gauge from everyone in the chat kind of like what you're wanting to get out of this workshop today. Usually in my experience, there's like a lot of different levels of people who, are at different stages of their journey in terms of, music production and things like that. So yeah, if anyone has anything specific that you wanted me to touch on, feel free to type that in the chat. Let me actually pull up my Google Doc here. While you are potentially typing those questions or writing those comments. Let me see here. There we go. All right. But yeah, today generally what I'm going to be touching on is a little bit of gear, types of mics, audio interfaces, things like that. Setting up for recording, a little bit on vocals workflow, and then vocal processing. So basically creating your vocal chains. And then if there's time, maybe we'll talk about sampling, but that's a lot of stuff. So we'll see what we get to. All right, Amanda says, any Melodyne tuning editing tips? It's so laborious. I agree. Whoops. I'd like to learn about experimental vocals, distortion, etc. Recommended plugins for vocal processing. All right, cool. There we go. So, and the amazing thing about having these special guests too is that I feel like everyone has a different approach in terms of how they make music, and how they produce vocals. So, which is why I always think it's interesting to see everyone's different process. But yeah, without further ado, let me go ahead and share my screen. And then Jamie wanted to know, I'm curious to see how much Melodyne can clean up vocals like my hum sounds. Okay, so just to kind of tell you off the top, Melodyne is more for tuning than it is for cleaning up vocals. But I'll show you my go-tos for cleaning up audio and just general plugins that I use. All right, so let's jump into it. Nice. So I wanted to touch on first, and normally, sometimes it just kind of like depends. I will create slides that's a little bit prettier in terms of presentation of information, but I just wrapped up teaching the Ableton course, which I see a few familiar faces here. So I kind of had limited time in terms of putting this information together. Quick question from the chat. Will there be a recording of the session to reference later? Yes. All of these workshops are recorded and they will be sent out. The recordings will be sent out at some point so you can review the info. Yeah, so I wanted to touch first on gear. So, what do you need to record your own vocals? And, the nice thing is that there's so many different, ways in which you can go about in terms of just like gear, right? And, when you're starting out versus like when you've been producing for a few years, I would say that you don't necessarily need to spend like a lot of money in the beginning, right? So like for example, when I first started producing, what was my first audio interface, I think was like an M Audio, like one input audio interface. And like at that time, I've been producing for a while. At that time, I would say that like the lower budget audio interfaces like didn't have like, we'll talk about this in a moment, just about audio interfaces and preamps, didn't have like as high quality preamps for lower cost. But these days I feel like you can kind of get like a little bit more bang for your buck. And actually it just reminds me, I have a bag of audio interfaces on the floor, which I might show in a moment. So yeah, and what I mean by that too is like, yeah, when you're starting out, if you just want to like get your vocals down, I mean, technically, like you could use like your computer mic, right? Now it's not going to sound as good as like, let's say like an actual mic, but there are so many options in terms of like how you can record yourself, right? There are USB mics, meaning that they connect directly to your computer. And so actually, before I talk about the different types of mics, let's talk about audio interfaces because when I mentioned that there are USB mics, again, those are mics that would plug directly into your computer. But let's just say, like this mic, for example, that I'm speaking into right now is a Shure SM7B. So this requires an audio interface. And let me scroll down here. And what does an audio interface do? So let me actually grab that bag of gear. My little bag of goodies. So basically audio interfaces convert microphone and instrument signals into basically a signal that your computer and software can recognize. So, anything you record into the interface is, an analog signal. So when it starts with the mic, it's an analog signal. But then the audio interface then converts that signal into a digital one that your computer and like Ableton Live, for example, can process. So that's referred to A to D, ADA, analog to digital conversion. We're not going to go like super into this, but I just kind of wanted to explain like the idea that like if you have, let's say, this type of mic, or we'll talk about other types of mics in a moment, then you will need an audio interface to basically like convert that signal to a digital one. Yeah, and then what happens is once it's converted that signal to a digital one that Ableton Live can then understand, so it's like zeros and ones, it then gets converted back from a digital signal to an analog signal, so digital to analog conversion. And which then like the audio is then played back for you, either through your headphones or through monitors. So every audio interface has what's called A to D or D to A converters. And, different audio interfaces essentially like have like different quality converters. And that would be like a reason in which you'd be like, I'm going to buy this audio interface, for example, because it has like quality converters rather. So, and I'll talk about this actually in a moment, another thing to consider when you're buying an audio interface, but just some examples of audio interfaces. So this is like one of my first interfaces, the Focusrite Scarlett 2i2, and I would say that's like a pretty common one. The one I currently have is the Apollo Twin, the Duo. And then I kind of wanted to give this one a shout out. It's a little bit newer, the Apogee Boom, which I don't know. I think that it's really cool that these days, like this is, I would consider this like a lower budget audio interface, has like pretty decent preamps, which actually, since we're talking about that, we'll talk about this and then go back to mics. So what are preamps? So basically an instrument or a voice, like I mentioned, produces sound waves. So it's an analog signal in the air. The microphone converts this to an analog electric signal. The energy is then carried to what's called a preamplifier or preamp, which amplifies this electric signal so that it can be digitized. Yeah, and then often these preamps are built into audio interfaces, so ADC, analog to digital conversion. So technically, you have ADCs like in your phones and AirPods, however, et cetera, et cetera. But like this has preamps in it, like the Apollo that I have audio interface has preamps, and each audio interface just has like different quality preamps, which really what that translates to is like, and you'll notice this is there's like usually like a gain control or gain input control on your audio interface, which basically you can control in terms of like, if you think about it this way, it's just like the higher you turn up the gain input, the louder the signal essentially, right? And with lower like quality preamps, usually you'll find that you have to really crank that gain knob in order to get like a decent signal, basically in order to get like a good loud enough level. But usually when that happens, when you crank the gain really, really high, that's when you start to hear like noise. So really good preamps, you'll find that you don't have to basically turn up the gain input that high in order to get like a decent level. So, and I'm just like mentioning that. So if you're like, I want to find an audio interface, how do I make that decision? One decision would be like, what are the quality of the preamps? Another thing I wanted to note is that in regards to preamps, technically you can buy like standalone preamps. So that's kind of like on my bucket list in terms of like gear that I want to get from my studio. But yeah, in the meantime, you can just find a audio interface that has decent preamps. But yeah, like I mentioned, the more expensive the interface, the higher quality the converters and mic preamps, also referred to as just mic pre's. But going back to microphones and types of mics, and I'm not going to go super, super in depth here, but just so you're familiar with the types of mics that exist, there are what are called dynamic mics, which I would say are pretty common, especially with like live performance. You've probably seen the SM58, which is like usually like the live performance mic, right? But yeah, dynamic mics are typically the most robust, meaning that you can drop them on the floor, not like you should be trying to, but they're pretty durable. They're also very budget friendly. They're the least expensive. So they're really great for live vocals, guitar, studio guitar amp miking. They don't require power. We'll get to phantom power in a moment, but phantom power won't hurt dynamic mic. So less sensitive, meaning they can take a beating physically, and volume, meaning again, dropping it won't damage it as likely. And also in terms of like volume, certain mics just are more sensitive in terms of volume, meaning that if it reaches like a certain sound pressure level, then it can actually damage the mic. Jamie asked if your mic has a dent, is that okay, or could that be causing problems? So it has more to do, I would say, like, I mean, you don't want a dent in the mic, but when I'm talking about like dropping the mic, like if you drop, we'll talk about condensers in just a moment, but if you drop, let's say like a condenser, you can actually like damage what's inside of the mic, which can basically affect how it operates, right? Um, cool. Dynamic mics too, generally less top end, meaning less high frequencies than condenser mics, and generally more low end, low frequencies that need to be EQ'd out later. So, but yeah, some examples: SM57 for miking amps and snare drums, SM58, and then this is a SM7B, which you might have seen for like podcast vocals. And then it's, you know, used for studio as well. So I use this mic, even though I would say like this particular mic tends to boost. When I say boost, it means like it accentuates the like volume wise of lower frequencies. So, and we'll talk about EQing in a little bit later, but generally speaking, my voice is already low. So it actually accentuates like some parts of my voice that I don't particularly like think sounds good. But I have this mic because, and we'll talk about again condensers in just a moment. It's really good to use in like noisy environments because, as mentioned up here, it's not as sensitive, meaning it doesn't pick up a lot of like background noise. Like it picks up street noise, but not as much as if I were to use, let's say, like a condenser. I'm actually going to skip ribbon dynamic mic because I just kind of want to talk about the more common ones that you maybe use for vocals like in your studio. So a condenser mic would be something that, let's just talk about this here. Condenser mics are just most commonly used in like home and professional studio recordings as they're more detailed than dynamic mics, meaning that they literally pick up everything. So if I were to be using a condenser mic right now, you can literally hear every sound like in the background a little bit more clearly. They work very well on a wide range of sounds. And then condenser mics work by sending, actually, I'm going to skip that part because we're not going to actually talk about the mechanics of a microphone. But yeah, so best for studio vocals and acoustic instruments. And they require power, meaning that they require what's called 48-volt phantom power from a preamp. So what that means is that without phantom power here, it just means that you won't really get loud enough of a signal for the mic. So just to kind of show you here. So this is a standalone application for the Apollo Twin for my audio interface. And so you can actually see that there is a 48-volt. This is related to phantom power. So I just like happen to have this on because it doesn't damage this mic. But like if I had a condenser mic connected right now, then I would actually need to have the phantom power engaged. And if I didn't, what that means is that the signal just wouldn't be loud enough and you wouldn't be able to hear me at all. And then, yeah, as mentioned, condenser mics, they're very, very sensitive, high fidelity. And then, yeah, most popular, Neumann U87, very expensive mic, AKG C414. And yeah, in terms of like the sound, I would say like the high end is accentuated, high frequencies, so they sound bright compared to a dynamic mic. And yeah, I'm not going to go super in depth, but just good to know just like the general like types of like primary mics out there. And then if you're curious, there's a lot of this information online, by the way. So if you wanted to learn more about, there's like more than just like the condenser and dynamic. There's a lot of different types of mics if you're curious to kind of learn more about that. But yeah, in terms of like what mics you should use, one thing to look at is frequency response. So not all mics capture frequencies in the same way. And I kind of hinted at this. So like dynamic mics, for example, will boost more of the low end depending upon the dynamic mic. And then, yeah, condensers tend to boost more of the high end or be more responsive to the high end. And then I mentioned this earlier, max SPL is referring to sound pressure level. And so it just means that like certain mics are more sensitive to loud levels, and it actually can potentially like damage the mic. So yeah, not all mics are made the same, and that applies to how loud of a sound it can accurately record without distorting. Um, cool. So we talked about mics, we talked about audio interfaces, we talked about preamps. So other types of gear. So there could be, where is it? Put it over here. You might have seen what's called a pop filter. So it looks something like this. And so this actually has foam on it, so I don't necessarily need to put anything in front of it. But basically, if you may have seen something like this. So if I was using a condenser mic, which again is like very, very sensitive, I would want to use something like this, like a mic shield or a pop filter. So essentially what this does is it prevents what are called plosives. So so if I say puh, right, there's a lot of air coming out of my mouth. So this basically kind of like prevents all that air from going to the mic, right? It kind of like reduces that effect of the plosives. I'll drop this in the chat. This is actually something that I picked up from my friend. But in addition to pop filters, there are also what are called, there we go, isolation shields. So that would be something like this. And basically what that does is it essentially like right now I mentioned that I record in a really noisy environment, right? So this basically would potentially prevent some of that like background noise in the room, or, you know, the reflections from the room or the outside noise of like having the mic pick that up. So isolation shield is kind of what does what it sounds like, what the words indicate, right? Just like isolates the sound. So those are some things that you can use to kind of mitigate those issues. Madeline asked, do you use the pop filter with the SM7B? No. So I just mentioned that, but no, because this has a foam thing on it. So personally, I don't need that. I would use this though with a condenser mic for sure. Great question. Oh no, that's okay. We're also on Zoom. It's very easy to miss things in general. All right, so let's talk about just what you would do to set up for recording. So let's say I've got my SM7B here. I've got it connected with an XLR cable, right? Which looks like this. So this is connected from the mic into input one on my audio interface. So that's another thing to consider when you're considering purchasing an audio interface is how many inputs do I need? So input is basically like what you would connect to. So with a mic, you only connect to one input because it's mono, one channel. Let's say I have a synth that's stereo, then I have left, right, outs on the synth. That would be going into two inputs on the audio interface, so therefore I would need two inputs. So in this case right now, I've just got, yeah, my mic connected to input one. And let's see how I would set that up in Ableton Live. So a couple of things. In Live, make this nice and big. Also, can everyone see this? Just want to make sure we have Zoom set up. Okay, perfect. Cool. All right, so one of the first things I want to do before I record is go to Live, Preferences, or this may actually say Settings, depending upon your version. And there's a couple of things you want to do. So for one, you want to head to the Audio tab because it allows you to choose your audio input device and your audio output device. So the way that I think about it is your input device is how you're recording. So for example, if I have my mic plugged into my audio interface, because that's what I'm going to be using to record, that's my input, then I want to make sure that I choose the name of my audio interface, which is this, Universal Audio Thunderbolt. Great. My output is how I'm hearing sound. So for example, if I have my headphones plugged directly into my computer, I would select, which I don't, so it's not going to be that option, but I would select MacBook Pro. I think it's like external headphones. Speakers means it would play out of the speakers. And then normally what I would do is I would have my headphones plugged into my audio interface and I would select that. However, I want to make sure that the audio plays for everyone on Zoom, which is why I have this selected right now. Another thing to note is, so that's audio input and output, is the sample rate. So I didn't even put that information there. Cool. That's very helpful. But basically, the way that I think about sample rate, and I might have put this in, hold on, let me go over here because we just had a course on it. For those of you who attended the Ableton course here in the last week, we talked about audio. There we go. Sample rate. There we go. Perfect, beautiful visual. So sample rate is basically the number of samples that are played every second. So I talked about the idea of your audio interface converting that analog signal to a digital one, right? And so technically your computer has converters as well, but this just happens to have higher quality converters. But the sample rate is just basically the number of samples that's played every second. So think of it like every second of audio is composed of tiny grains of sound, and the more samples that are present, the more accurately the sound has been recorded or captured. I also kind of think of it like a bunch of snapshots. So if you think of it like someone's taking like a bunch of photos, right? And then like it plays all those photos in concession, right? Then you get more information. So that's what a sample rate is. And in live, so actually let me just for a moment switch over here my audio interface just so we can get more information. Zoom kind of gives me limited information when I choose that output. But see here sample rate, and you can choose between these numbers. So if there's 441 is the minimum number, and then it goes all the way up here, which is a lot. So actually, let's go back here. There we go. So I would say for like most music applications, meaning like producing music, like the average music producer, you could choose 441. I would say like that is something that for one is usually like the final version of the song, like after it gets mastered, tends to be 441 16-bit. But I would say also like I started producing and choosing 48 kilohertz. This is the sample rate that's often used when creating music for video. So, but the one thing that I want to mention, because I feel like there's like sometimes like a discourse between these two, is that no matter what you choose, just be kind of just like cautious of if you're working in a song, just like this is like the song I'm working on, this is my project, I would just try to stay at the same sample rate rather than like going back and forth. So for example, if I'm starting a new song and I set it to 48 kilohertz, I'm just going to make sure that every time I am in Ableton Live, I just make sure that I just kind of like stay at the sample rate. And then if I'm sharing a project with someone else, that I'm trying to stay at the sample rate, same sample rate. So I'm not going to go too into that, but just a general thing that I wanted to note. So there's sample rate and then there's buffer size. So the buffer size, the way that I think about it is if you notice, there's this whole section over here, it says latency. So this is really referring to the idea that if I were to say something or sing something, it's like, how long does it take after I like perform something or sing something? How much time passes before I make a sound? And then how much time passes until I can hear that sound? So if you notice, it says overall latency 91.8 milliseconds, which doesn't seem like that long. This is what my buffer size is now. But notice what happens when I reduce this to 64 samples. it's going to jump down all the way to 9.12 milliseconds, which basically means that if I sing something, I'm going to basically hear it right away instead of like hearing a delay. But one thing to note is notice up here, this percentage is really jumping up there. And that basically means that like this is my CPU percentage, how hard it's working. And so if I were to try to play back audio, sorry everyone, I did that on purpose just to kind of demonstrate that what happens if you lower the buffer size. This buffer size, what that means, we talked about the idea of sample rate, right? So if I set it to a really high number, it means that basically like my computer is processing more samples at a time, meaning it's like processing more information at a time. Whereas when I lower that buffer size, lower this number, it's like not able to process as much information at a time, which is why we're seeing this number cranked up. So to kind of just like boil this down into really simple terms, if you are recording, you want to make sure that you lower your buffer size to a low enough number where essentially like you minimize the latency, but that you're not getting like the crackles. And I'll show you something in a moment when we talk about just like workflow in terms of like recording vocals. And then if I'm playing back audio, I just want to make sure that I choose a really high buffer size, especially if I have a lot of things going on in my project, like a lot of plugins and things like that. Cool. So perfect. So buffer size. All right, cool. So now I'm going to show you my personal process for, let me close out of this, for how I basically like record vocals. So as you can see, this number is like really cranking it up. And also I'm screen sharing in Zoom, which also uses more CPU. So it's just going to be a little bit more intensive right now. But I tend to record my vocals like usually after I've like really fleshed out my instrumental, which means that I probably have a lot of like synth VSTs and plugins, third-party plugins that use like a considerable amount of CPU. And so in order for me to like really be able to reduce my buffer size to a nice low number, this is what I like to do. Let me change this back to Zoom audio. So what I like to do is once I'm done with my instrumental, let's just pretend there's no vocals in here. I'll then just like bounce out, meaning I'll export the instrumental, the main wave file. So I'll select the time, I'll go to File, Export Audio, right? And then export the master, which is basically, let's just pretend it's just like instrumental tracks. And then I'll go to File, Save Live Set As, and then make a version of the song that's basically like the vocals version. And so I'll show you an example here. I'll go back to this in just a moment. But so music, Ableton Live Recordings. Here we go, for demo. So do you see how I have a lonely, so this is the name of the song, box section, and this says for demo because I'm basically prepared it for demo. But I went to File, Save As, and I just basically made a different version of it. And yeah, let's open that guy here. Okay, so this is my instrumental. Let me see if it'll, oh, I have to change my output. All right, I'm not gonna play the whole thing. I'm gonna play it when we go back into the main version. But yeah, basically I just have this instrumental, and then what I do is then I just like literally create the different audio tracks, and then I record all of my stuff there. So, and then to set up, if you're new to Ableton, you basically just go to create, insert audio track. Is this live 12? so people probably have different versions of Ableton Live 11, Ableton Live. So in the new version, you actually have the mixer view and arrangement view now, which is really cool. But for those of you who don't, I'm just going to switch back to to session view, so you can see what this looks like. So I've got my audio track here. And so now that we've like set up our settings, right? So I probably, want to set this to like a lower buffer size. Usually my sweet spot is like 128 samples for my buffer size. And then, let's just like name our tracks, because that just makes it easy in the long run in terms of organization. Yeah, and then what we're going to do is we are going to make sure that our audio inputs, outputs are selected, right? And then I'm going to arm the track. So we can actually see something's happening here. And okay, this is indicating my level, right? This is indicating what input my mic is plugged into on my audio interface. So I have it plugged into 1. We can actually see the level here. But we can't hear anything, right? So you can hear something because my voice is going through Zoom right now. But if I were to set this to auto, you're going to actually hear a doubling because of that. But let's just pretend I'm not on Zoom. Usually you would just hear your voice like this. And actually, I think something soloed. Yes. Something else is soloed. Yes. There you go. Now I hear latency because there's a lot going on. So this is what you would click on if you're monitoring through Ableton Live. Monitoring just means that you can hear yourself, right? What I would recommend is if you happen to have an audio interface where you can monitor outside of Ableton Live and directly through the audio interface, or like a standalone application that, let's say, the audio interface like comes with, anyways, I'll show you just in a moment. But I would recommend that, because anytime you're monitoring through Ableton Live, there is just going to be latency. Again, meaning that you'll hear a delay after you say something or sing something. So what's nice is with the Apollo, Universal Audio Apollo, there actually is a standalone application called Console, and I can monitor directly through the audio interface. So if I actually turn off mute, I can hear myself, and you might still hear a doubling right now. But this is great. So if I'm performing, I can hear myself. I can whatever I'm saying right now, I can hear it right away, which is what you want when you're performing, right? You don't want to feel like you're like on drugs. That's ideal. So so that's monitoring. And then the other thing you want to check for are your levels. So this is indicating what your levels are. And I think I wrote this really nice thing here. Adjusting your levels by adjusting the gain on your interface. So if you are using an audio interface, so for me, that would be, adjusting this input right here. The first thing you want to do also is maybe like singing the loudest part you're going to sing. And ideally you want the meters on your track to be like, I would say like around maybe negative 12 dB actually, and then peaking no higher than, I would actually say, negative 6 dB. And what does that mean in Ableton Live? So this is just like my average level right here. And then this peak here is the loudest that it's getting. So I'm not like actually singing right now. I'm not like belting, but I just want to make sure that this peak number here is usually like no higher than negative 6. And why is that? It's like you just want to make sure that the level's loud enough, but you don't want it to be so loud that you don't have what's called headroom, which means that the difference between this level here and 0 dB. You also want to make sure that it's not clipping, meaning that when this turns orange or red, you're basically distorting the signal. And then, did I note this here? No, I didn't. But basically, if you record something too loud, you can't really like change it later on, meaning that if it like you record something that's distorted, you can't make it undistorted. However, if you record something that is a little bit on the quiet side, you can kind of make that, a little bit louder. Okay, cool. So real quick, and then we're going to talk about just like workflow here. But I wanted to just talk about the idea of take lanes. So, and if you were in the Ableton class last week, then you would have seen this. But basically, the idea of take lanes is like you can, if I were to, let's say, I could record through the whole song, yes, but I find personally that I like to record section by section. I find that I get less tired vocally. My voice gets less tired if I just record in sections. Um, but I'm just gonna, yeah, let's just go ahead and loop this small section here just to kind of show you what take lanes looks like. So actually, let's do that. So I'm going to select this time, and then I'm going to type Command L, which loops this section here. And then what I like to do, so you'll see this loop braces on, meaning that if I play through, it's just gonna, when it gets to the end here, it's gonna loop it over again. And then I like to click on these punch in, punch out buttons, because what that means is when I start recording here, it just means that it won't record here. It'll only record in the section where the loop brace is surrounding. Meaning that if I want to lead up going into the intro, but I don't want to necessarily record here, it's not going to record either here or after that. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this record button here. I'm lonely when I turn the lights on. I see too much, I cannot shut down. I'm lonely when I turn the lights on. I see too much, I cannot shut down. I'm lonely when I turn the lights on. I see too much, I cannot shut down. Okay, so I really just did that to show you that what I did just now is I looped this over and over again, and I recorded the same thing 3 times. And so what I did is I basically recorded 3 different takes. So different versions of this, kind of like the same thing. And if I right click on this track now, I can show take lanes. And even though like we could only see this initially, right? Now I'm actually seeing these 3 different takes. And if I want to hear each one, this is how, there's different ways to do this, but I like to press the B key, which is the little pencil tool here, and then I can click and drag on this. And now it's going to play this take up here. Let's just solo that. Lonely when. So I forgot the words. There we go. So there's that version. And then there's this. I'm lonely when I turn. Right? And then there's this version. I'm lonely when. Okay, so that everyone's ears are not in pain, I'm not gonna actually like play this one, but I will show you what I did here. So this is not very well organized, but I think this is, yeah, this was my main lead vocal here. I'm lonely when I turn the. And if I right click, did I do this here? Yeah, show take lanes. There we go. So you can see I did like quite a few takes here. And what's nice is then you can basically like select. So actually let me, I'm gonna undo what I just did. You can select like the best parts of the take that you like. So I'm gonna press B again. Well, let's just do this for a sec. There you go. So let's just say I liked the first part of this take. I can select that, and then maybe I can select this part, and then I can select this part. And basically notice that each part that I'm selecting, it creates a composite up here, or a comp of the parts that I've selected, which is really cool because if you think about it, if you're like, oh, I liked like the first half of the first thing that I sang, but I didn't really like the second half, but I'm gonna now, maybe the second time I sang it, the second half was a little bit smoother. I can basically take those parts and comp them together and kind of Frankenstein them together to make it sound like I sang it in one go. So that's basically like what I did here is you can see like the highlighted parts is like take 1 or take 8 rather. I liked that part, and then I liked this part and this part and this part until I created a comp. and it kind of sounds like it's like all one part, right? Um, yeah, they added this in 11. Yes, it was a definite game changer, which is just crazy that it took them long to do that, to be honest. But here it is. Here we are. Now we're thriving with recording vocals. So yeah, so you can basically create your comps here, and then if you want to learn more about take lanes, because there's a lot of stuff I want to go over in the next like 15 minutes or so. Um, there is, let me just throw this in the chat. There's a lot of videos, first of all, on Ableton's site. Um, but they have these really informative, really short form videos actually on, yeah, Logic's had it for a while, on how to like learn different things basically in Ableton. So this particular video is specifically on comping in Ableton Live. And I would say it's like pretty intuitive for the first part. I think particularly if you've used Logic before, you're like, okay, I've seen this before. And I don't think I'm going to talk about that, but let's jump to, cool. So we talked about take lanes, and let's talk about a little bit of workflow. So yeah, I mentioned the idea of just like recording in sections versus like through the whole song. So again, I prefer to do sections because I just think it's a little bit easier. So like, I don't really need to go into this, but so like I'll record like this area here, and then I'll like move over here, you know what I mean? Until I've recorded like section by section, and then I just basically like create my comps by doing what I just showed you. So that's kind of like one part of the workflow. And then I'll basically just record all of the different parts, meaning that I'll record my lead first. So the lead is basically like your main vocal. So, and then I'll show you a song example in a moment. I think this is like a newer song on mine, so I haven't really recorded that many versions yet, many different vocal parts, I mean. But usually like you would record like your lead vocal and then maybe like your double, which is basically the same thing, like the same, let's say, melody, but you're kind of layering it on top of the main vocal. And why would you say, why you ask, you're asking, I can't talk today because it's so hot. You may ask why can't you just take the same thing that you recorded and duplicate the track? Technically, if you take the same exact waveform and duplicate it, really all you're doing is you're making it louder. Kind of the beauty of recording the same thing, even though it's like the same melody, usually the timing will be slightly different. The pitches will like vary slightly. So, and what's cool is like by recording a double, it kind of has this effect of like thickening the sound. I'm lonely when I turn the lights on. And I don't think this one, yeah, these, neither of these are like tuned. So it's like you hear this like wide variation of like warbling of tuning. But imagine if these were like tuned, right? Then you kind of get like this like thickened, wider sound, which is really cool. So adding a double is kind of like actually unlocks a lot of layering of the sound. And once I discovered doublings, I became a big fan, and I was like, whoa, this sounds like way better. And then let's see, so you got your doubles, and then you may want to record like harmonies, and then like ad libs, which are basically kind of like the little parts that are like not main necessarily like the main melodies, but they're like little things that you would hear in the background. Mariah Carey is like the expert on ad libs. Usually like you hear some really cool ad libs like in the outro or the end of the song or like the last chorus. Yeah, so I would record those parts first, and then I would go through my take lanes and do some comping. And then I would get to the work of editing out silences, clicks, etc. Meaning that you might see that up here there are some gaps here. So actually, this used to be one whole thing, meaning that this thing existed here, right? So if I solo this, we can't really hear anything actually, but you can see there's like a waveform. And so Usually what I like to do is for one, create a fade at the beginning and end of the phrases or at the end of the clips. So a fade is basically it's like literally a volume fade. So it's quiet and then it gets loud. And why would you want to do that? Sometimes like there's like, it'll just like soften. First of all, sometimes it'll soften the beginning of a phrase, or maybe there's like a really loud breath at the beginning that you want to soften, or maybe there's like a click at the beginning that you want to get rid of. So I usually like to create fades at the beginning and end of the phrases, and then you might want to, if you have two clips, this doesn't really apply, but if you have two clips following one another, then you want to apply what's called a crossfade, which looks like this. And then, and actually, I'm going to go back to where it was before, where I decided to literally edit out this part where I could just do this here, I guess, shorten this. And it's probably because, like, I don't know, sometimes there's like a silence, but you could hear like the headphone bleed through basically you can hear like the music playing through the headphones. Or maybe you can hear like background noise or things like that. And you want to make sure you get rid of that stuff because for one, I'll show you in a moment, but when you're tuning, that stuff gets picked up. But then also once you add compression, that's when all that stuff gets like accentuated, right? You can actually like hear those like little things. So, but yeah, anyways, I like to clean up the audio here as much as possible. And just a reminder, if you have questions, if you could please throw it in the Q&A section, just because there's just a lot going on in the chat sometimes, and I'm going to try to wait till the Q&A section to grab those questions. Cool. So that's one of the steps here after I go do all my comping is I'll just like go and clean up the audio. And then let's see here. And then, oh, this is just like so underrated. And once I started doing this, I feel like this was like a game changer for just like when I started to apply compression, which we'll talk about in a moment, is the idea of clip gain editing. So what is that? So I double click on a clip. You can see that there is this little meter here for gain. So if I go like this, you can actually see the waveform getting bigger. That makes it louder. If I go like that, it makes it less loud, makes it smaller. So when I say clip gain editing, that's basically the idea. This is like pretty even here, but that's the idea of like, if this was, for example, much louder than this part of the phrase, I basically am going to go through all of the vocals on a track and just make sure that the volume is predominantly the same. So, and I can kind of like eyeball it by looking at the waveforms, right? But then, you know, I can also use my ears. So if I'm like, oh, this is like, I don't know, I get really loud right here. I might even like split the clip. If this part was like really loud, click here, Command E. Let's just pretend this is really loud. And then I can just like literally split that clip and even that out by making it less loud. And I'll show you why with compression in a moment, but basically like you want to make sure that your dynamic range for one track is predominantly the same. That's going to save you a lot of headache for compression later on. One of the other things that I'll do is also maybe like fix some timing. So for example, if there was like, I don't know, something that like a word that was like slightly off, I might want to fix that. And there's a couple of different ways you can do it. I like to just like do it with the clips, meaning that I might literally just, if the whole thing was slightly off, I might just like literally nudge the clip manually, just like in the grid here in arrangement view. Or if I double click on the clip, I can also use warp tools, meaning that Ableton's like warp feature basically allows you to change the timing of audio. So we're not going to go super in depth, but basically the idea is I can, for vocals, I want to change my warp mode to something like complex or complex pro. And then let's just say I want to move, let's just say this note here. I can double click here to add a warp marker, double click here on one side and then double click here maybe on the other side. So I'm basically creating these like little pins here in the rubber band. And so if I go like this, I can basically just like nudge this note here if I needed to like move the timing just of that one note there. So yeah. So I want to basically make sure that I'm like going through and adjusting any potential like timing problems. And also if I recorded, let's say, a bunch of doubles, I want to make sure that those are lined up as well so that everything's in time. And then let's just talk about tuning really quickly. So someone had a question about that. I'm not going to go super in depth just because of the limited time here in this workshop, but that is the next thing that I would do, especially in this vocal session set, basically. Because what I'm going to end up doing is once I'm done with the tuning, I'm going to export out the audio and import it back into that original Ableton Live set I was working in that had like all of the instrumental tracks. So this is my workflow. By all means, this is just like what I've discovered for myself, what works. But after I've done the editing here with like editing out silences and things like that, then I would basically create an audio track, throw Melodyne on there. And Melodyne, by the way, for those who don't know, it's tuning software that is amazing. It essentially like allows you to really fine tune, no pun intended, the tuning for every single note, which is really fantastic. So yeah, basically what I did is I duplicated or I created an audio track, and then I grabbed the audio clips and put it onto this track here. And I'm not going to show you how to use Melodyne because we don't have enough time, but I just kind of want to show you the gist of what I did here. So I basically got these notes in here, and what's cool is you can set the key that you're in, right? And then you can actually use, like, be able to see where it is on the graph, where the notes are, and then you can, sorry, not gonna do that, but you can basically like use these tools here to like move the notes around. And I'm basically like using Melodyne to like adjust the tuning for every single note. And what's cool too is like you can select everything, and then not that one, but you can, I didn't do this here, I guess I normally do. You can snap it to whatever key it is and then kind of just like adjust like the pitch center and pitch drift and things like that. So I just kind of want to go over like the gist of like what Melodyne does. It really allows you to individually tune every single note, which is really, really neat. And I actually feel like it's like fairly like intuitive for those who like maybe are like not super familiar with like, I don't know, like auto tune or tuning things in particular. So that's what I did there is I basically like did the tuning here, and I'm lonely when I turn the lights on. I see too much, I cannot shut down. Right? So it's like a little bit more tuned or in tune compared to like the original thing that I recorded. So I'm really moving breezily through here because I kind of just want to give like a general overview. But before I open up the other project, or another project rather, I want to answer Madeline's question. Is there a way to cut out breaths and fade multiple tracks at once? Like if you have a stack of harmonies to cut out breaths and fade? Oh, that's a good question. Let me see if I have, let me just undo that. So, I mean, technically you can do something like this where like you can just select that and then press delete. So yeah, if you have like a bunch of things that are like stacked like that, you can just select time and then literally just press delete, if that answers your question. But yeah, you probably ideally want to have the tracks like literally stacked right on top of each other to do that. The other question is, will there be a replay available? Yes, there will be. There will be a link to the recording that will go out. Okay, cool. So Is there a way to fade multiple tracks? Yeah. So again, same thing. Like if you think if you can just, sorry, F, or actually, that's a good question. Have I ever done that before? I don't know. Actually, Shay, do you know the answer, or does anyone? I don't know if I've. This is mostly for stacks of harmonies. Um, I'm trying to like think in my mind now if I've ever done that. I I'm gonna put a pause on that question. I don't know about Ableton Min Studio One. You could select multiple and then just create the fade. Is it possible to record doubles and have them sound like one voice for a more intimate, folky sound? Oh, I think that was the question that was. Oh, I see. Make sure to also like again drop the question in Q&A, not the chat. Yeah, I'm sure there's a way to process that. I mean, recording doubles is just the idea that you're like layering the same melody or the same vocal part. But I'm sure like you can apply vocal processing kind of make it sound like one voice. Oh, I see. That's fine. All this under you can turn on phase on and preferences. Otherwise, maybe select all trades and fade one. Yeah, I personally, I don't think that you can do the multiple fades at the same time, but to someone's point in live settings, there is like I have it turned on, but I think it's in record, warp, and launch tab. There's a create, oh, I don't know why I don't have it fade on, but you can create fades on clip edges on, and so that just basically will automatically create fades. So that's really weird because I feel like I had it on at one point, but I don't know why I turned it off. But yeah. Anyhow, let's move on. So I'm gonna go ahead and open up. I'm gonna open up a couple of different, just real quick here. Workshop demo. Okay, so after I do that, I basically just like export the audio and then so for example, I would export the audio for the lead vocal and then my doubles and then my harmonies and then I would import it into my main project. And then I would start working on my vocal chains. And what is a vocal chain? So this is going to take a moment to open up because this is big boy. But basically, let me find my vocals here. So a vocal chain would basically be just like all of your vocal effects, right? From left to right, typically, if you want to think of it that way. So, and that's why it's called chain, because it's like one thing after another. So that could be like EQ and compression and things like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you for this particular song what is in this particular vocal chain. So let me just play a little snippet and then yeah, let's this might be, hold on, I think I have my, a good example of setting your buffer size to the highest possible, which is not very high for Zoom audio device, but we're gonna try. I don't know why I let the fear crawl deep inside, shines like a mirror. It takes control, which I think I need, losing all sense of serenity. Sometimes I get so in my okay. I don't. Whoa, hold on. I just realized a bunch of plugins are all of a sudden disabled. Let me just make sure I opened this in the right version. I did it, and that's why. Okay, cool. I was like, things sound very different right now. Okay. Sorry, I am going to bounce between live 11 and live 12 real quick. All right, let's open this in 11. And while I'm doing that, thank you. This track came out in March. And then while this is opening, I want to answer Peachy Keen's question. Which Melodyne version do you recommend? Essential, Assistant, Studio? So I have, what is the second one? Not the lowest one, Assistant. Yeah, I have Assistant and that works for me. To be honest, there's probably like a lot of features that I don't use, or I probably don't use it in the most efficient way, but I find that it kind of like gets the job done. Yeah. Sarah asked, do you use Sends to create a vocal chain, or are the effects placed on each audio track? That's a good question. I will show you right now what I did, and it kind of varies between song to song. But okay, so there we go. Let's just play the verse here. I don't know why I let the fear crawl deep inside, shines like a mirror. It takes control, which I think I need, losing all sense of serenity. Sometimes I get so in my head, the foggy states can't get out of bed. I feel it taking over me, filling my brain with. Okay, cool. So let me just solo this here. Actually, it's just solo all vocals here. So let's just see what's going on in this chain. So by the way, this looks like this because this is placed in what's called a rack. And if you've ever attended an Ableton Live or an Ableton Live, a FEMME House workshop before, you've heard me talk about racks. And an audio effect rack is basically just like if I have, let's say, like an EQ device, and let's say compressor, and let's say like saturator, and whatever I want in this like chain, right? What I can do is I can click on this one. I'm going to select all of these devices basically by holding down the shift key, clicking on the last one, and then I'm going to type Command G. You can also right click up here and then select group, Command G. And that places it in what's called a rack. And what's great is it basically just like contains it in one place here in this rack. And so basically all of these are in my rack. And then my first thing in my chain is going to be my tuning. So I've already applied Melodyne, right? But, and by the way, I'll show you, I don't know why I didn't have it here, but maybe I already like applied so someone had a question. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Someone had a question about like getting rid of like background noises. So let me see. I might have another. There we go. Yes, I do. I have another track that has these plugins on it. So Isotope makes some really fantastic plugins that clean up audio. So RX10, you can see voice denoise, mouth declick, deplosive. So they work really amazingly. So deplosive is again that p, right? So if somehow this didn't get rid of that, I can use this plugin to get rid of the plosive sounds. One thing to note is, for some reason I didn't realize this until like the other week. This adds a ton of latency, which I don't. Let me see if I play this here. Make me lose my mind. Okay, it's not doing it here, but maybe I'll show you another example later. But basically, long story short, these plugins are amazing. They get rid of like things like plosive sounds, or they'll like clean up like noise or audio in the background. And yeah, just one thing to note is that they do add a lot of latency. So sometimes what I'll want to do is like add these plugins to clean it up, and then do what's called a freeze and flatten, which basically will print these plugins, basically bake it into the audio, meaning, and I'll just do it here real quick, but freeze. Oh, this is not late 11. But basically you can freeze the track, and then it'll give you the option to flatten it, and then it like converts this to like a waveform, like an audio clip that contains whatever these plugins were doing inside of the waveform. Sorry, the audio clip, if that makes sense. I'll show you an example in just a moment, but basically like yeah, I've got my plugins to like clean up the audio in the beginning. And then typically, and then let's go back to this lead vocal here. And then I'll have my, where is it? Here we go. There we go. Sometimes my auto tune at the very beginning. So auto tune is just like, I'm using it here as like a way to kind of just like create like a very specific effect.
I don't know why I let the fear crawl deep inside, shines like a mirror.
About it.
It takes control, which I think I need.
So with it, right? So this, by the way, this version of AutoTune has like a bunch of like different effects. So this is AutoTune EFX Plus, and then this is like a very specific preset that I'm using here. Oh, thank you, Peachy, for putting that in the chat. So yeah, but typically you would want like your tuning plugins to be like towards the beginning of the chain. And then I've got something called Soothe, which is basically like a dynamic, what is it called? Dynamic suppressor. I always forget the exact. So OX Soothe, which is pretty cool. It's so basically it removes harshness from any sound source, manages sibilance in voice vocals. So that's like the S's and the T's and the like really sharp sounds that you hear. And oftentimes when you apply compression, it like accentuates those sounds, right? So Soothe is basically like a plugin that helps you like mitigate that effect and remove the harshness from those frequencies. But yeah, you can treat uneven tonal balance from suboptimal recordings. It's a dynamic resonance suppressor. So basically identifies problematic resonances on the fly and applies matching reduction automatically. Yeah, so I've got that in my chain, and then I've got EQ. So a couple of things that I'll note about EQ is, so again, you can use like stock Ableton effects, right? So they have like EQ8, and it's pretty fantastic. But I'm a huge fan of FabFilter's Pro Q3. I just find that it's a little bit more accurate. And the idea of EQ, for not super familiar, is it does a couple of things. Let me see if I have. Yeah. So it does a couple of things. For one, it'll boost or cut levels, which is, think of it like volume at certain frequencies. And then it also can help provide tonal balance. So here what I'm doing, so these are different EQ curves here, and they're just like basically EQ curves are different ways in which you can cut out frequencies or boost frequencies, meaning you can cut out, lower the volume, or boost, make louder. So here I'm basically cutting out below 70 hertz. I'm cutting around 230 hertz because this mic, I mentioned that it boosts certain like lower frequencies, and I find that it like boosts like between 230 to 250 hertz in a way that's just like kind of boomy. It doesn't sound very good. So I'm cutting that here. I'm also cutting around 576 hertz to kind of get rid of some mud. And then I think I boosted around 4 kilohertz to kind of like get some of more pronounced of like the usually I like would want to cut around 4 kilohertz depending upon the situation, but in this situation I found that it was like really kind of like dark sounding, so I was trying to make the vocals a little bit more present. And then I also was boosting around like 7 kilohertz here. Yeah, and then I've got a compressor. So the idea of compression basically is that you're basically using it to manage dynamic range, meaning that throughout your song, your vocals are going to get really quiet and then they're going to get really loud, right? And the idea is that you want some dynamic range depending upon what you're going for, what style you're trying to produce in. But you don't want to like startle your listener, right? So if you start belting and it's like really quiet and then it gets really loud, you don't want like the loudest part to be so drastically loud that it's just like not a pleasant listening experience. So basically the idea um, of compression is that you can set what's called a threshold, which is basically like the idea that, all right, I'm going to say, I'm going to set my threshold at negative 12 dB. And then every time it gets louder than negative 12 dB, I'm going to have the compressor compress or make less loud anything that goes above that level. So I think visuals are really good, but like, let's just say these are like not very loud, but do I have any waveforms here? I guess I have this reference track. Let's just say it gets a little like this is less loud, right? This waveform you can see is less, then it gets louder. So basically my compression would be like, all right, I'm setting my level here, and anything that's above this point, like these peaks here, I'm gonna bring them down and make them less loud. And the idea is you're just like making your dynamic range, like the highest part, the loudest part, and the less loud part closer together so that the sound is like a little bit more consistent, if that makes sense. Cool. So I've got my compressor here. And again, there's an Ableton compressor, but I'm using FabFilter's Pro C to compress. And then
I don't know why I let the fear crawl.
and we can see this vocal doesn't have a lot of dynamic range. So in this case, I'm really only compressing about -3 dB, which is not a lot. And usually in my case, I'm trying not to like compress more than like, I would say -7 to -8 dB. Otherwise, it's going to sound really squashed. But sometimes that's what people want, depending on what you're going for. So after my compressor, I also have another EQ, except this EQ here is really more for like tonal shaping. So this is like emulating an actual hardware EQ, and this is pretty fantastic. This is made by Universal Audio, and it's called Pultec EQ P1A. And basically what I'm doing is I'm boosting this knob here around 10 kilohertz, which is like your what's considered like air, like the higher frequencies kind of gives you that like nice sparkliness. So without this,
I don't know why I let the fear crawl deep inside, shines like a mirror. It takes con.
so it's super subtle, but again, it's just like kind of boosting the air. And one thing that I would encourage you to do is start to kind of like learn what parts of the frequency spectrum kind of sound like. And one way to do that is literally just kind of like, if I add an EQ here, is start by, you can click on this arrow, by the way, to make this nice and big, is kind of going like this to, and you don't want to go super, super high because this basically going up makes it really, really loud, but like maybe just kind of sweeping through to hear what it sounds like in a specific area.
I don't know why I let the fear crawl deep inside, shines like a mirror. It takes con.
This is a really cool thing, EQ82. I can turn on the headphone icon and then it'll just like only solo this wherever I'm, whatever band here I'm selecting.
I don't know why I let.
So we can hear it kind of sounds a little bit muffly over here, but if I go around to like 10 kilohertz,
I don't know why I let the fear.
right? We can kind of hear it's like this kind of like brighter, more sheeny type of sound, which is like one reason why I wanted to bring that out with this particular plugin. I've got another compressor here, which again is more for like kind of like tonal shaping. And this is a Universal Audio 1176 compressor here. And then I've got a saturator. So again, Ableton has a stock saturator. And that's what this looks like here. And so basically what saturator does is it boosts mid to high frequencies, which really result is it kind of like gives sound like more of a like a presence and warmth. And if you really increase this drive knob, you can start to like make the vocal sound kind of like distorted. I'm a big fan of Sound Toys Decapitator, and I really just like kind of drive it just a little bit. And the mix is just like how much of the effect that you're adding. And so, yeah, you'll notice that it's my dry knob, my wet knob is only here. Um, so again, dry is like if I had this all the way to the left, it'd be like no effect at all. And then if I turn it all the way to the right, you're fully hearing the effect. And I'm really just using in this in a way, if I turn this off, you probably won't hear much of a difference.
I don't know why I let the fear crawl deep inside, shines like a mirror.
And it's super obvious. And I think the point that I really want to make is that like all of the effects that you add in your chain, like saturation and reverb and delay, a lot of times I'm like adding it in like little subtle ways so that it like kind of like all adds up to changing the sound overall, like in a certain way. After the saturation, I also have a chorus effect, which a chorus is kind of like has a similar effect to what we heard when we were like added the doubling, right? So chorus kind of like widens the sound. So this is Sound Toys Micro Shift, which is fantastic. But if I turn this off,
I don't know why I let the fear crawl deep inside, shines like a mirror.
it's super subtle, but just to kind of show you without, do I have this guy here?
I don't know why I let the fear crawl deep inside, shines like a mirror.
Again, it's like super, super subtle, right? And that's kind of like the point is I don't want it to be like super chorusy, but I want it to just like add like a subtle like effect there. And then lastly, I've got another EQ at the end to kind of like clean up whatever maybe the compressor like accentuated, maybe cut out things that like don't sound very good. And then lastly, someone asked you what effects do you put on your directly on the track and what effects do you put on your return track. So return tracks are basically like if you go to create, insert return track, those are the tracks that show up over here, right? And then like usually I'll put like my reverbs and my delays on them. And then you can basically use these send knobs here to send to these return tracks. So yeah, I typically will use like the return tracks mostly for like reverbs and delays. And that's kind of like what I've done here. And so like A is my reverb and then B is my delay. And then this is like a cool little trick, but basically like I've got my reverb here and my delay. And then after each effect, I actually have a compressor that has sidechain turned on. And I showed you this in actually the last Ableton class, but basically I have this set up so that the reverb ducks every time the vocal is like at a certain volume. So basically when the vocal is kind of like loud and really present, we hear like the main vocal, but then when the volume fades of the vocal, that's when we start to hear the reverb or delay tails.
I don't know why I let the fear crawl deep inside, shines like a mirror. It takes
I made this really subtle, but basically without it, it just like you hear, it's like kind of swallowed up by like reverb and delay. Cool. So let me just check the chat and the Q&A, and then we're gonna switch off. Sorry, I don't know how this went so long. I think it's just like so hot. My brain just like is honestly shutting off right now. Jamie asked, to sidechain reverb, it has to be chained to the sends and returns. So in general, it just has to be on a separate track. So technically you could create, you know, a separate track and then like basically like add a compressor, you know, on this track here. And then you basically have to, and then you add your reverb or delay or whatever. And then, yeah, basically choose like where you want the audio to come from. But I find that like for my workflow, I typically just like have it set up on a return track. Yeah. So, I think I'm going to stop here. I wanted to show you another example of, this is a pretty present lead vocal. And then I was going to show you another example of a project where the vocal is a little bit more baked into the instrumental, where it's not standing out so much. But yeah, this went a little bit longer than I expected because my brain is just so fried by the end of the week, and it's just the day after 4th of July. Also, LOL. But yeah, any questions in the chat before we move on to the next portion? Sorry, I'm trying to hold on. Let me stop this share real quick. Would the order of these effects change the end result? That's a really great question. So yes, you can basically like drag the effects around from like left to right, and the order that the effects on absolutely affects the way that it sounds. So actually, one thing I forgot to mention real quick is that I opened up this project, hadn't looked at it in a while, and I was like, ooh, that's like an interesting order of where I put these things. But honestly, like I was just using my ears, and if it sounds good, it sounds good, right? And maybe it's just like there are certain things I saw where I was like, why did I put this plug in here in this order in the chain? I was like, this doesn't seem correct, but it actually like sounds okay. So yeah, anyways, my point is like if it sounds good, it sounds good. And don't let any dude tell you otherwise. How it's supposed to be. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and let's answer that one here. Cool, LOL. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and read this beautiful intro here, and then I'm gonna spotlight our amazing guest artist. So today we have a very special guest artist. So I'm really excited to introduce. Her name is Shay, and she is LA based, producer, DJ, singer, and multimedia artist. She brings a fresh perspective to electronic music, drawing inspiration from artists like Kanye West, Gwen Stefani, and Skrillex. She combines her love of hip hop, pop, and electronic music with a classical background and worldly appeal. Shay plans to help pave the way for future female producers and artists. And I'm going to let her go ahead and share a little bit about herself. But without further ado, I would love to introduce Shay.
Hi, thanks for having me. How are you?
Excited to
Great talk.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so excited.
Lots of information. There's so much to know is the thing. So you did a really good job just like, with kind of just touching on everything. And then in every little, mini section, there's just endless information, right?
Like endless information. And I'm really excited to learn from you because I feel like there's always something different to learn from everyone. Everyone does things a little bit differently. So yeah, I'm really excited
Totally.
for your hot take.
Appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, a lot of kind of the things you said, using compressors, EQs, all the like gear, everyone uses gear, and then it's a matter of what gear they choose to use. And then, as for process, I think that can definitely vary a lot in terms of, how you record. And I mean, even down to like how many takes you do. Some people really just do very few takes. I don't know, not me. I take a lot of takes. I think, it's a double-edged sword when you're a producer, when you're a vocalist, when you do vocal production for yourself, it becomes a personal moment. It's like you become even more of a perfectionist, which I already am in my art, right? So I'm sure you can relate.
That rings so true.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought I would just screen share and open up a session and kind of maybe not get too deep into like the plugins too much, but just kind of show an example of how I produced out some vocals on Birds in Paradise. I chose that song because it's one of my favorites I've done. It's definitely like a tech house vibe. And the vocal for this is going to be honestly very simple, but I have plenty of songs where there's like 6 backing vocals, layers that are like put to the side and all of that, which gets to be a lot. But I think there's a lot of value in a really great vocal take and really great effects, and just like less can be more. Because one thing I was thinking of when you were talking about it is, I'll get into it a little later, but like one tip I wanted to share was like how I go about de-essing, because I have a lot of S's and sibilants that my condenser style mic picks up. And it's a lot to mediate sometimes. So one thing I was going to start off with saying is that nothing can replace a great take, right? You want to start off with the best possible take, both like your delivery, but also the quality of vocal, right? Is it peaking? Is it going into the red? Are your P's or your S's standing out too much? There's like little tricks I've learned about S's or P's, like pops. Like I have issues with both of those personally. So it's like make it kind of an M. If you're saying like play, you can kind of be like play, like even just mental things. I know that didn't really sound too different, but in the scheme of a very sensitive mic that's just picking up every little noise, it matters. So yeah, starting with a great vocal take will get you very far. It'll give you something great to start. I've recorded my own vocals. I've also recorded other people's vocals. So, you know, you want to get your options, like your takes, even if you're not editing everything right in that very moment. And then just like the best original quality. It's like my mom said, like, you can't replace your original hardware, like your teeth. Like once it's gone, it's gone. So
That's an
nerdy.
amazing.
Yeah, and a lot of vocal production in general is experimentation. So like you start with the information that you can find and that you're given to know how to go about getting the vocal take. And then it's a lot of like, you know, trial and error, and you're going to find some songs have different requirements than other songs in terms of more effects, or if you want a cleaner vocal with layers and stuff. So let me, and this is my first time doing this, so bear with me as I screen share my Ableton session. So
A shout out for like Shay's like ability to like want to do, like you look amazing.
what? Oh my God, you're so sweet. Stop. We're all just trying our best. That's what I always say. We're all just out here doing it, trying our best.
Like you in front
So
of Ableton screen.
So I wasn't kidding when I said this was a very simple vocal. So I'm literally just going to focus on kind of how I did the vocal and some of the processing I have going on. And oh, about the fade. Oh, I just wanted to make a note. Remember how you were talking about the auto fade in the preferences earlier? With record. Oh, I do have mine on. I thought I had mine off too when you were saying that, because you're like, I don't know why I would have it off. And I do know why I would have it off, is because I prefer working with audio clips as much as possible personally. So even when it comes to drums, that's just how I personally like to work. So if you were to have a new clip and it would just automatically have a fade on it, sometimes that fade, I don't have production in this session. So say this is like a kick drum right here, and it has auto fades on both sides. Sometimes if you go really close in, it'll take off like the transient of a kick, because there will be a fade, but it'll be like a little on, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Maybe that's also why I turned it
I
off.
don't know. Anyway, but in this case, I guess it's just on. So hopefully there's not too much latency in this session, but for the purpose of Zoom, I had just bounced out my 2-track of the instrumental to try to keep the CPU low in this, processing kind of low in this session, but
Deep dive into your mind, whiskey and
yeah, that's a lot of processing feedback I'm hearing. You also, Mini Bear?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe I'll just solo the vocal, but either way, I won't have to play too much. But it's basically an intimate, you know, kind of sexy, intimate vocal. So in my processing, I actually use an emulation mic. So it's called Slate. And basically, it can process some extremely expensive mics. The one I personally am using is this Sony C800G tube condenser mic. That's what it's emulating. That's like a $10,000 mic. So what's nice is that this mic itself was 600, I want to say, but it can, in its, technology, basically, because it does claim to be very high tech, then go and emulate different classic mics that are very expensive and sound very good. It does a good job. Do I want the 10,000 mic? Yes. $10,000 mic? Yes. But for now, we're going to go with this. So that's the emulator that it's doing right there. This next one is a Neve 1073 emulator, which is basically a mic preamp like Mini Bear was talking about earlier, which is usually like, this is all like digital, right? So it's in the form of this plugin, but there are actual, mic pre's physical, if you were to go to a big studio or music studio, usually these things exist in real life. But in this case, it's just in a plugin form. And then there's the virtual channel, this one, which is basically emulating going through a console, which is those huge boards you'll see in massive studios. There's a de-stressor. Let me see what we have. We have the EQ boosting the low end a little bit, and then a de-stressor compressor, which just makes it a little more aggressive, I would say. And then lastly, there's this air situation, which literally just gives the vocal some airy high end kind of.
Deep dive into your mind.
And I'm gonna hit it high for a sec.
Deep dive into your mind.
Sorry, I know it's latent, but you get the idea. It kind of makes it thin, and I like a little of that airiness, so I added a little there. That's all within this Slate software. So that's just, I just wanted to kind of touch on that when it comes to like what kind of mic I use. It's been a good way to go about things in the meantime before the $10,000 mic. Also, I'm just a big fan of, in both production and vocal production, that, you know your basics, like I was saying, and you know what things do, but to find out more what they do or what sounds good, it's not always the same answer. So for instance, I have this EQ, literally EQing quite a bit of the low end out before any of that. Don't ask me why. Normally it comes like after, because effects kind of go in order, where, all of this processing would be happening and then the EQ happens. And for whatever reason in this project, I put it first, and I tried moving it after, and it just sounded different and I didn't like it as much. So I said, you know what, I'm going to leave it, because there are rules, but there are not that many rules. So, I also remember someone asking about like vocal effects and stuff like that. So that's something I love playing around with as well. So I'm going to touch on how I got some of the vocal effects in a minute. After that, I have this TubeTech processor it's a compressor that is actually not really dipping anything. I just have it heightening the output volume. And I think I used a built-in preset that I have for like, not lead vocal, but for, I don't even know. Yeah, lead vocal there. Anyway, and then I just turned it down a little. It basically makes it quieter or louder.
Deep dive into your mind. Whiskey and orange rind.
And I'm not going to play too much because I know there's probably some weird clicking. I did everything in my power and I don't know. Zoom needs more power. Okay, this is something very important that I thought I could share some knowledge about, which is the UAD Precision de-esser. I love this thing, but I will say, with some plugins, you can make your settings what they are, and it'll target the whole vocal. And maybe I only want to target the whole, like a certain frequency within a certain part. So let's find like an S. I think there's one here.
Body shots and lime. Body shots and lime.
So this is an S.
Shots and lime.
Shots and lime. More body shots and lime. So lime. So on this S, I literally went in. Let's just say it was all connected. See the waveform is bigger there. Let's just say this was all connected, because it was at one point. I'm just flattening the audio for purposes of this. So you would just, if this is the S that you want to turn down and you want to de-S it, there's one way to use a plugin, and I'll show you in a second how you can find the frequency and then have them target that and turn the threshold down so that when it hits those frequencies, it dips down and it doesn't have such a harsh sibilance to it. But what I like to do first, and I learned this from a vocal producer very early on when I was being recorded by an engineer in like a New York studio, is I like to select the part, Command E, and simply, oh, see, now this is all effed. Okay, I'm gonna go back, sorry. But I like to select this part, and if everything else is, say, at 0, right, I'm just gonna turn it down. And sometimes literally I'll go to -9, and that's probably too much. You can hear it dip.
Body shots and lime, body shots and lime.
That actually sounds pretty good. But I also have other things going through. Yeah, go ahead.
Your head is in the way of the game.
Oh, it is. Thank you. Oh gosh, that's funny. Okay, here. That's better, right?
It's still in front of the
Wait, in where? Oh, in front of the.
yeah,
Oh,
game slider.
hold on. It's like opposite. Okay, opposite. There we go. My bad. But this little portion here that I've selected, if everything else is at 0, sometimes I'll dip it to like -9, but more often it's like -3. You're just turning it down just a little bit. And so you're already helping that S issue that was happening. And then let's just loop this part. Command L, like mini bear. And I'm just gonna bring in an EQ so I can figure out where the bad frequencies are on the S. And this isn't even the worst S, so it might be kind of hard.
Shots and shots.
So on
Shots
this,
and
now I'm in the way again, aren't I? Okay, so on this EQ right here, I have this area looped, and I'm gonna put the headphone on so I can hear just whatever I'm picking up here.
shots and shots and
And
shots.
the issue with the S is definitely in this area. I'm not gonna like hurt your ears by doing it too much, but you can also just move this Q knob and you'll hear really specifically. Like that's really bad, and I'm sorry for your ears, but I'll do this just to know that that's the bad part. Here it's kind of whistling, right? So that's at, I don't know, 3.9. And there's probably honestly a few different areas that the S is bad in. So that's how you find where the frequency is. When you go to the de-esser, you would set the frequency to whatever it was, 3.9. And you would bring the threshold down so that you can see in this area right here, it's dipping it quite a bit on that spot. Now, that was just kind of the long way to get around how I did it. But as I was saying, now that it's targeting that frequency, maybe I only want that frequency to be dipped on the S, not on the whole vocal channel, right? So I remember in this track, I have it actually automated. Let me just. I have it automated to be on only in a few spots. So that is my kind of workaround for my own process of de-essing. And as we get further down, I was just going to say this area right here has some effects on it.
Just birds in paradise, just birds in paradise, just birds in paradise.
And I kind of like to commit to things. So once, I think this is the area I'm trying to look at.
Just birds in paradise. Just birds in paradise.
Sorry for all the latency. So basically on this channel, I actually have all the effects running. And then the way I created that was using little alter boy and changing the formants as I saw fit, which kind of basically pitches I'm just bypassing some of these other things I have going on. On this effects, am I in the way still? on this on this effects thing. I have an overdrive going. I have little Alto Boy, my reverb, and Endless Smile, which is kind of a delay reverb effects plugin, which I'm obsessed with actually, and I'll get to that in just a sec. But you'll see this formant knob moves according to the automation that I did here, which over here it'll like be lower. So in combination with Little Altar Boy, I also have Endless Smile triggering and kind of gaining, kind of giving a little rise moment in it. And what I was going to say is the reason it's muted here is because I kind of like to create separate channels sometimes, like even if that could have lived on the same line as the lead, it's kind of nice having it separate so that if you ever wanted to change things specifically to that, it's just easier. Also, sometimes I'll freeze and flatten like these. I actually resampled, and I can show you how to do that in a sec. It's very helpful. You'll see the resampling right here on this audio track. So basically, again, I know we're having latency issues, so I don't want to, you know, play too much, but basically you'll create a new audio track, which is Command T. And then instead of external in, you're going to do resampling, and then you're going to trigger it to record. And I'm soloing whatever I want it to record. So you would just go hit record.
Just birds in paradise. Just birds in paradise.
And so on, and let that play out. And now this alone, when you solo just what it just recorded,
Just birds in paradise.
it has all those effects already written onto it without any of, you know, the plugins actively working. So I like to do that, and I'll take, you know, these two tracks right here are resampled, both resampled.
Just birds in paradise.
And then in addition to that, I have some, you know, additional, I'm in the way again, some additional EQ going on, and Endless Smile plugin kind of giving a little effect to that here, triggering up. And then I actually don't remember what this,
Just birds in paradise.
it's exactly the same, but there must have been a reason, or maybe it's just a double. So yeah, I don't know. There's like rules to follow, and then there's just kind of let your creativity go. And that's kind of part of my process for being creative, is resampling into new audio tracks so that I don't know, it's like painting on a canvas that already has a painting on it or something, and it's like repurpose this again, and it's kind of like letting your creative juices flow a bit. So yeah, and I was gonna say I do takes, honestly, kind of take by take. I don't even use the cool attribute of being able to have your vocal takes in the same what did you call it, Mini Bear?
Comping.
Yeah, well, the comping, but the takes, the pull down menu. But anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, take lanes. I don't even know what it's called in Ableton. No, I used to use Studio One actually, by PreSonus. I really love that for vocal editing, vocal comping. And like you, I do also enjoy when my vocals and all the processing that they're going through are kind of, some of it's written onto the vocal already when it's in your session, so it's not overloading your CPU. So if you're looking for another program to experiment in for vocal recording, it's extremely smart. It just feels very smart in all of its abilities, and it bounces out vocals really fast. You can bypass reverb in one click on all of the vocals, and some capabilities that honestly I haven't quite seen in Ableton, but for workflow, especially if you're producing as well, it's super helpful to just kind of have everything in that session. It's just a matter of CPU and if your computer can kind of handle it. But yeah, I was gonna touch on anything else, but I was just gonna say Endless Smile, if you're not familiar, is by Data Life, and it's just a very cool plugin. And for instance, and there's different settings. It's basically a combination of filtering, delay, reverb, like noise generation. So it's really cool, like in electronic music. And yeah, those are just kind of a few of the tips that I use and encourage people to experiment, basically, you know, like you can know what everything does, but until you start moving stuff around and hearing, you know, turning knobs literally, well, in the digital world, I guess more these days, but turning knobs and hearing how it sounds. But definitely knowing a lot of the fundamentals and a lot of the stuff Mini Bear went over is important. So you're getting nice clean takes and you're getting good signal and you're starting off with a good vocal to then go and play around with. And yeah, I don't know. I was gonna cover more, but I feel like that's a good starting point. I'd love to do another sesh. I know it's
Oh,
been a
I didn't realize why I kind of I was like in my mind I was like there's so much to talk about with
right,
vocal production that it's just like I feel like there needs to be like a part 1, part 2, part 3
right, a series.
series. But yeah, that was amazing. I'm really glad that you touched on the splitting, the isolating the clip and adjusting
Hmm.
gain for de-essing because I actually also learned that from a friend of
Oh,
mine who
really?
produces vocals who like produce Himes vocals and
Right. Oh, real quick, because you were talking about breaths and stuff, I think this is probably breath.
Speedboat, speedboat,
That's not.
speedboat.
Let me try to find a little breath or something.
Time, more body shot.
Well, there's not really a breath, but
The time, more
you hear how there's there's a little like a exhale of noise right here.
time, more
Time. So, I mean, I always just Command E. I'll break the shit out of vocals. Am I allowed to cuss? Oh yeah, we're not on anything.
yeah, children in it.
I'll break vocals way down and just go in and like make it. I prefer, instead of just delete, I personally prefer to keep some of that because I think it helps the overall vocal sound a little more cohesive. So I'll just, you know, fade stuff right into however I want it. And if that's a part that I would just like to basically almost get rid of, I'm again in the way, aren't I? I will, you know, select that and just turn it down. A lot of stuff can be done manually. And so I think plugins all have their place for sure. But again, not overusing and not over affecting will help, because what I was saying earlier, just to clarify about the S's, same thing goes for, I don't know, all of these little breaths. Is if there was like Soothe probably would do it on certain frequencies. I actually don't use Soothe, but I want to. I should. I've heard great things. Is say you found that, you know, in the de-esser that the frequency at around 6.6 was is being ducked on every time. If I just had it not automating right here and here, so that's where it's actually I realized I lied. I know it's on the whole time. So I have it on the whole time. This is actually another important thing. I have the de-esser on the whole time. However, The threshold is automated. So here, here, and here, it's gonna pull down those vocals even more, because in that spot I found the S's to be especially bad, or whatever that frequency was. And I do have it going at like a more moderate amount along the whole vocal, which is what my moderate might be severe because I have issues with
Dive into
it's still at like -13, but yeah, I don't know. It's just something to play around with. My point being, if the threshold the whole time were set super high or super low so that it would be ducking a lot of that frequency throughout the vocal, you might just lose the quality of the whole vocal, you know? So yeah, it's just something I've noticed. And even more reason to kind of focus on delivery, getting the right take, making sure your levels are right as you're in the recording process, so that then you don't run into as many of these issues and can focus on like the effects and all of that. Oh, and real quick, I was just going to say this reverb is amazing. It's my personal favorite reverb, EMT 250. It's a UAD plugin. I have this echo effect going on it in this song. I'll just play it once. It's kind of mellow. It's the dry wet. It's pretty dry, but I'll put it wet so you can hear what it would sound like.
deep dive into your mind.
I'm going to put it high for a sec.
Deep dive into your mind. Whiskey and orange.
So this is just cool to me because there's effects. I really like the phase one actually, which creates some latency, but
Deep dive into your mind. Whiskey.
so again, issues with Ableton. Sorry if you can't hear everything so well. It's painful. But yeah, I think that's about it for now.
Hot tips, and we love plugin recommendations.
Yeah.
There's
Let me
one
stop this screen share.
Yeah, I see
You can
one
come back.
question in
Hmm?
Q&A. Also, yeah, if anyone has any questions, make sure you drop them in the Q&A box. So it's like last call for questions. Also, if there's something we didn't touch on yet, go ahead and drop it in the Q&A. But I see Madeline has a question. Which mic is good to start with for a plugin like Slate?
It's a great question. Honestly, what I've found with mics is that it's one of the hardest things to decide on in a way. Like I've gone to, audio stores that have mics set up that you can go try out, this, that, and the other of all price ranges. And it's every voice is so unique. If you can, it's helpful to somehow try out if your friend has a mic or different mics and kind of see what you like best for your voice. I don't know the answer to that as a general question, but I only know the one that works for me as kind of a more airy kind of soprano, if you will, type vocal generally. But yeah, that's the Sony C800G is what I use. I've also used the Manley Reference C before, and I like that a lot. But yeah, I don't know. It's kind of, what do you think, Mini Bear? I mean, that was a specific to Slate question, but
Yeah, I mean, I've actually been wanting to try the Slate plugins because I've heard some great things, so I can't really speak on that. I honestly feel like I'm still trying to discover which
mm,
mic. I actually don't love the SM7B, even though I'm like using it right now. I feel like I'm oftentimes having to do a lot of EQing to get my voice
mm,
sound the way that I want it to. So I prefer, in general, I prefer condensers just because I think dynamic mics just tend to bring out like the lower end of my voice, and I just already have like so many low frequencies. But yeah, I think your suggestion of like borrowing mics from friends is like a good call out. Also, like buying mics from like, I don't know, Amazon and like returning them.
yeah. Oh, one thing I was just gonna mention real quick when it comes to cleaning up vocals manually. I know this is so utterly simple, but I just want to touch on it real quick. So I'm going to screen share again. Just real briefly. That for me, who has a little of the higher voice, when you're cutting the low end, and this is kind of why I have this, hold on, I'm doing it again. I I have like the opposite problem as you, funny enough, is that um I need more body in my voice kind of, but at the same time you have to, it's a fine line because a lot of this low end that right here I'm cutting out um is what causes kind of muffled room noise, like some of the like tapping of the mic or that sort of sound, room sound basically. For me, and I think for everyone, there's like a general hertz that they recommend, like 100 to 130 hertz. Cutting it out. As you can see here, I'm cutting mine at 250, which is kind of a lot. Which is why I have so many other things happening. Like one of them's boosting the bass. Like it takes, I cut out the low end and then I boosted whatever was left of it. And so, you know, whatever comes before or after, sometimes I'll cut something, add it back and cut it again. And somehow it's just like once you cut it and then you compress it or you boost the signal, things come out, like new dynamics come out and new sounds come out that then you need to temper down. So again, it's a lot of trial and error, especially with mixing, and vocal production is a lot of basically mixing of, you know, sonics, and also with your track, of course. And that's part of why EQing a little of the low end out clears up room in the mix for other things. Of course, if you're a guy or a male with like a lower voice, different rules, but you still do take out some of that low end.
I'm glad you mentioned that, but it is a lot of like you do one thing and it affects another thing, and that's why it requires a lot of
Right.
because I was cutting I think up to like 150
Mhm.
hertz, and then like I was like I took my friend's vocal production class, and I was like I just feel
Mhm.
like I always struggle with like my compression, and
Mhm.
she's like I feel like you're cutting like way too much of the low end, because if you
Mm.
cut like too much that actually affects like the high end like
Totally.
less. But yeah.
That's super interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, there's another question from Jenna. Do you try to use a mic that accentuates your natural tone or that offers what isn't in your natural timbre?
Definitely accentuates, I would say. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, you can just hear what kind of makes your voice sound kind of actually exactly what you said in the question, accentuates, you know what you like about your voice or what sounds good about it. And when you put the headphones on and you try the mic and you're talking into the mic or you're singing, do you like the way it sounds? Is it too tinny? Is there too much high end happening for your voice, for mine, for example, or is it adding a lot of warmth, which I personally like? And because I do have a little of the tinniness naturally, so I'm like trying to, well, funny enough, accentuate, but also bring out the best of, right? So
Yeah, that's a great answer. Uh, any other questions? I don't see any. But yeah, this was fantastic. I loved hearing all of your tips. I always love like also seeing other people's vocal chains, and then like
it's kind of embarrassing. It's like seeing your bedroom or something.
no. But that's cool. And I think it's like really validating to also see like, oh, why did I put this? I put this plugin is supposed to go here and it's
Right.
here because it just like happened to sound better, and that's just like really validating because I sometimes
Yeah,
share a project and I'm like, ooh, should I be sharing this? This looks like wrong.
I
But
know. I know. It's so true. It's so true. Yeah, it's just like whatever works, and it goes for production too. Um, when it gets to the nitty-gritties, like the mixing and some of that, I do think some of those rules come back into effect. But just as in like getting the effects you're using and the timbre of the sound, especially like I do house music, we do dance music, right? So it's like vocals don't need a lot sometimes. Like, have you heard mommy? I say mommy because that's how
example,
but
I'm
it's so simple, a lot of these like take it off, undress, well, that's actually called take it off, but some of those vocals, that are less sung out, they're just,
great.
but they're actually, there's still things that go into it, even though it sounds very, simple and Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This was just like so amazing hearing your perspective and seeing the
Yeah.
project and
Thank
um
you for having me. And also I'll have to watch the replay to see your intensive breakdown of everything.
yeah.
That was a lot. I
That
loved it. I
was
was like soaking it all in. Yeah. It
I unintentionally went a little bit too deep, but yeah, for
was
those of you
good.
who are going to be watching the recording or just in the chat in general, we'll have many more of these. I feel like vocal production is just like one of those topics that there's just such a thirst for, and also, yeah, there's just so much information. So we'll definitely have more of these. And if you want to learn more in terms of like what other workshops we have coming up, there's the link to our site. But yeah, thank you everybody for all of your wonderful questions. And thank you so much, Shay, for sharing your amazing knowledge. And
Thank you. And thanks for joining in, everyone. Yeah. Love Femme House.
we love you.
Wait, let me take a picture real quick.
Oh,
Can
yeah.
I?
Well,
Hold
yeah.
on. I don't know how I'm gonna do this. Hold on. Self timer. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay. 3, 2, 1. I think it did it. Much love.
Yes, we got the chat. But yeah, wonder how I can't even talk anymore. It's so hot in my apartment right now. But yeah, I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. And yeah, thank you for everything. And we will see you soon. Bye.
Yay. Bye.